Children at the Border, Roseanne, and Starbucks anti-bias training. I'm Donna Davis, and this is the Square Circle. Hello, and welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Donna Davis. Joining us today are Stephenie Foster of Smash Strategies, Ross Kaplan, president of FinlitOC.com, and Kelley Vlahos of the American Conservative. Welcome, everyone. A major controversy erupted this week involving the children of illegal immigrants being separated from their parents at the border. Here's the story from CBS News.
The Mexico border is now more intense than ever. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen on May 4th ordered federal prosecution against any individual caught crossing the border illegally. As a result, those adults traveling with children are now being separated once detained because children cannot be held in adult jail. Secretary Nielsen recently defended the move.
United States, if you break the law, you go to jail and you're separated from your family. Shouldn't be any different for illegal immigrants.
If this is a strategy, it seems pretty extreme. What are your thoughts on what they're doing with the children and parents?
Well, I think it is a callous strategy and cruel. One thing to point out really to start the conversation is that not everyone who's coming to the border is really an illegal immigrant. There are asylum seekers who come to the border, and in fact, that's what asylum seekers are to do. They present themselves at a port of entry when they're seeking asylum and say what their case is. And the U.S. government, or the government that's receiving them, has the job to determine whether or not those people have a legitimate basis for their asylum claims. So the idea that these people are all illegal immigrants, I think, first of all, sort of muddies up the water in terms of this conversation. This is a very different policy than we've had in the past, the separation policy, where children as young as, there have been reports as young as 1 year old, there have been 100 kids under the age of 4 since the beginning of the year, taken away from their families. So I think this is a policy that has no real basis in public policy in terms of deterring asylum seekers. When Attorney General Sessions announced this earlier, he said that this was to stop child smuggling, and that's certainly, if there is trafficking or smuggling, then obviously that is a legitimate reason to take someone away from the adult that they're with. But that's not the case here, and I think it is a policy that really is just cruel.
Ross, what are your thoughts on this policy?
My thoughts are that the policy would go away if the inefficiency of the government were addressed. So if, and you're absolutely right to point out that it is the policy of the United States that you can apply for asylum. You present yourself to to a representative of the government at the border and say that you want to, before crossing over the border, of course, that you want to apply for asylum. I think that the issue at hand is that this should be a non-issue in the sense that it should just be handled more efficiently, and that comes down to the ability for the government to act in an efficient manner. Once you start bringing people into the country, putting them into families of people that might be related to them, might not be related to them. Let's determine who the actual enemy is in this particular situation. If it's the ORR, right? If it's the Office of Refugee Resettlement, I think is what it stands for. If they are incapable of keeping track of these children, that's clearly a problem. So maybe we need to put a face as to who exactly we'd like to improve in this situation.
Kelley, do you think there are any solutions out there that haven't been looked at?
Well, what this tells me more than ever is the Congress has really abdicated its responsibility on crafting a fair, comprehensive immigration policy in this country. And what we're seeing is the broken nature of that policy. Most people in polling, most Americans want to see a fair immigration policy. They want to see many want people who are here illegally to find a pathway to citizenship. That's an issue that Congress has been grappling with. But they also want to see the process through which we bring new immigrants in every year legally, refined, fixed, reformed, so that we don't have a system in which people are coming to the border, detained under, in this case, criminal detention, families separated. They want to see people get here legally, and they want a process through which, if they are not supposed to be here, that they're put through the system faster, more efficiently, and sent back home. Having kids language in detention camps is cruel and abhorrent. And I think Jeff Sessions standing there announcing this zero tolerance policy, saying, well, if you don't like it, then don't try to smuggle your kids in here, puts a very inhumane face on our country's policies. And we could, I know we don't have much time, but let's look at the conditions in which these people are living in, where they feel that they have to rush the borders and come here because they're fleeing violence or poverty. We have a role to play in that too. So I think that this is multi-layered, but I think that zero tolerance, separating parents, putting kids in detention, no go for this country.
Do you think that there are solutions that are out there that have already been voiced? Or do you think that simply there's a vacuum in terms of solutions? Ross, what do you think?
So I agree with a lot of what you just said. I think that we need to take a step back and ask that question. Why, how bad is it, the situation in the place that somebody came from? And part of the reason I don't like the statistic about the 1,500 children is I don't know what country they're from. I want to know what country they're from. I want to know precisely the issue in that country. And if that means that we need to have an international response, I mean, that's why places like the United Nations exist. There are institutions like them exist. And if they're not operating efficiently, we as a people that are paying for them to operate need to demand that they operate in the manner in which they were intended. Because at the end of the day, what's the bottom line here? Either you're going to have completely wide open borders, or you're going to have a completely closed border, complete isolation. And you're going to be somewhere in between in those two points. So, if the goal is to be somewhere in between those 2 points and still manage what happens on the border, we need to start answering her question, which is, what exactly is happening in these places, and why is it so bad that? But at the same time, nobody's doing anything about that. If you can raise the standard of living around the world, it seems like a much more sustainable approach than, obviously this is not sustainable because we're not even able to handle 1,500 people. So what makes anybody think that we can handle even more?
Stephenie, do you agree that we should be going into these other countries and involving ourselves in their political and social welfare situations?
Well, that's what we do. I mean, just to back up, I think it's interesting. We all really agree on a lot of this. There's a need for a more rational system, faster adjudication of these asylum claims of people who present themselves. And yes, I think we do have a role, both as individually as the United States and also as part of the world community, to think about how to intervene in countries to address these issues, and we do. The vast majority of the asylum seekers at the border are from Central America, and they are from countries that are violent. They're fleeing gang violence and all that, and so I think we do have a role to play.
Thank you, Stephenie. I would like to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, or via Facebook or Twitter, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. Also this week, ABC pulled the plug on the reboot of Roseanne. After a racist tweet from the star of the show, here's NBC's news coverage.
Tonight, a stunningly swift and dramatic end to Roseanne Barr's TV show. ABC canceling the hit revival after Barr tweeted this about former President Obama's advisor Valerie Jarrett. Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby equals VJ. ABC Entertainment President Channing Dungey calling Barr's words abhorrent, repugnant, and inconsistent with our values.
Kelley, these are certainly interesting times. I don't think we would have had this reaction a few years ago. What are your thoughts?
Well, interesting times indeed. I feel like, probably like most Americans, or at least the viewers of this show, that I feel like the bombast and rhetoric on both sides, left and right, Democrat and Republican, have been ratcheting up to unbelievably inappropriate levels of late. And this isn't the first time we've seen a comedian or an entertainer take it too far. Someone who has been known for their sort of wily body rhetoric have just crossed the line, whether it's racist or sexist or homophobic. We look at somebody like Mel Gibson or Michael Richards of Seinfeld. We have people. I kind of went along, looking throughout the history of people being canceled or fired. It's gotten worse, and I think because of the politics. I think we have comedians who are fine on stage. They can keep within their parameters, and they get into their little echo chambers on social media, and maybe they're, like Roseanne said, she was popping Ambien. Sometimes their people are drinking, and they go too far. I've seen reporters reporting on Donald Trump during the campaign, saying things like, "I hope that guy dies," and then have to come. They wake up maybe with a hangover the next morning, going, "Oops, I'm sorry, I apologize." But that seems to be becoming normalized, the taking it too far. And in the case of Roseanne, what I worry about, what I heard among the sort of the chatterati the next day, was this sort of broad brushing. Well, Roseanne was a supporter of Trump, therefore all supporters of Trump are racist, and we need to acknowledge that. And that's half the country. He's our president. He was elected. To suggest that all of his supporters are somehow proto-Roseannes, proto-racists, proto-Nazis is just going to exacerbate the divide in this country. And I'd like to keep the conversation, on, the inappropriate behavior, the way we treat each other. I mean, Samantha Bee, very popular talk show host, had to apologize just yesterday because she called Ivanka Trump a word that began with C and ended with T. And she said, "I apologize." Did she get fired? No. But this is the level of discourse, and I find it very troubling. And I think it's been going on both sides, and that's in no way to excuse Roseanne Barr. I'm glad she got fired. I just think she's an insufferable person, and I think by throwing all of her staff and cast and directors under the bus and basically saying, "I really don't care about your livelihood," I think that she didn't deserve to have that comeback. So that's just...
Stephenie, I have to think about the fact that whether people say these things out loud in public, they're still thinking them. And so we are where we are socially. How do we deal with these issues on a more organic level? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think civil discourse is really the most important point. And I would agree. I think we're in an era where people say things that are... I actually, a lot of times, just don't understand why someone thought they should say something. When I read her tweet and heard the whole conversation about it, I thought, well, why are we even talking about this? This is so crazy and obviously offensive and racist. But I think it's about trying to have a civil conversation, understanding that we can disagree and not be disagreeable, and not really cast aspersions on other people's motives, and be nuanced about the discussion, which I think is something we're not really good at and we're getting worse at. Understanding there are lots of layers to these conversations, and really helping people feel like they should have a conversation that isn't so stilted, isn't just black and white, seeing the issues in a very sort of almost comic book way. We really need to help people have nuanced conversations and respect each other.
I have to think about the fact that Roseanne came up during the Howard Stern era, and he was on regular radio for years, and it wasn't until very late that he actually got moved to Sirius Radio, where he can continue to say anything he wants. But she did come up during that time when it was appropriate, it was expected, it was welcomed to say these kinds of things. What do you think of the fact that she is in a new era and doesn't seem to be adjusting? Does that excuse her behavior in any way? Do we have anything to say on her behalf with regard to how she came up?
People being incapable of adapting to a new era is not acceptable in any industry. So, and that includes the entertainment industry. If ABC wants to fire her, they have every right to do so, as far as I know. And I would have done the same thing. if I were ABC. So I don't think she gets a pass because she grew up with Howard Stern. And the fact of the matter is, it's an interesting example about Howard Stern because he was eventually taken off the air, and now he's on this private network on Sirius.
Well, Sirius is millions of people. I wouldn't call it private. I mean, it is paid
private
for.
in the sense of it's not on the public airwaves. You have to
Agreed.
You have to buy a special subscription. So no, I don't think she deserves a pass, and I would have personally been disgusted by that type of comment, even if she said it during Howard Stern's time. So it seems to me that people, as a society, I think one thing that as a society, I think people are often kind of confused or perplexed where to get inspiration from. And maybe we look at kind of like famous people. I kind of use that term loosely when describing Roseanne, but it kind of maybe we look too much at famous people for guidance or for inspiration. And I didn't even know anybody read her Twitter. That being said, I think ABC did the right thing.
I would have one thing to say, and that is we have to think about the fact that people do come up in different eras, and we need to not judge everyone, even people who have some bad habits. Well, anyway, finally, Starbucks closed its stores on Tuesday so employees could undergo company-sponsored anti-bias training. The move was a response to the episode last month in Philadelphia in which 2 black men were arrested for trespassing when waiting for a business meeting but not buying anything. Well, Ross, what do you think of this? This is quite the episode.
About the training or the situation?
Well, the fact that the men were arrested and now Starbucks must have lost quite a bit of money closing their doors for hours.
So, first and foremost, the person who called the police should not be working in a customer-facing position. There's no, she shouldn't have called the police. And the reason she shouldn't have called the police, and we can get to her motivations, potential motivations in a minute. The reason she shouldn't call the police is because even if she was trained or by her manager, or if she herself believes that somebody should buy something to be at Starbucks, you don't know if they bought something an hour ago at Starbucks. As a matter of fact, they might buy Starbucks every day. So I think it's very assumptive of her to assume that these people are not clients, and that she called the police, and that was wrong. You don't call the police on your customer. If Starbucks wants to have a policy where you need to have a pass to get in, you need to scan yourself in, badge yourself in like you're going to an office, that's fine, but they don't have that right now. Right now it's a public building. Anybody can walk in. So the police should not be called. That's number one. Number two, I also don't believe that they should have been arrested because I think it would have been maybe another 30 seconds and they could have left and not have this arrest record on their record. As far as the training goes, Starbucks can do whatever they want with their time and their resources. I think they're going to be judged more so on their reaction after the matter than on the actions of this one rogue employee, or at least I would hope so. And I think their reaction was, I think they tried. I don't know if it was the best reaction possible, but I think they did try. And I think that the training was at least, they had good intentions with it.
Well, I do feel bad for that employee, I have to admit. It's hard to always know in situ what is the right thing to do. Kelley, what are your thoughts, both in terms of the employee's actions and the arrest, and actually thirdly in terms of the training?
Well, I mean, quickly, I think the employee's action and the arrest were pretty stupid, and I think Starbucks rightly faced a lot of scrutiny and pushback and blowback for that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the training because I think we have two things here. One, was Starbucks aiming to develop best practices by closing all their stores for one day for this anti-bias training? I mean, or was it damage control? I think it was damage control. I think if they really wanted to set some standards, some best practices for what you do when you have people loitering or lingering in the store, when you don't think they bought something, have a list of rules and regulations, and have a manager training session about these things. But putting every employee through anti-bias training, I felt was overkill, and it almost blames every employee they have as though that they are potential racists. And I have personally gone through a couple of these things myself. I worked at Fox News. I was there when Bill O'Reilly faced all that controversy over sexual harassment several years ago. They made every employee go through 3 hours of sexual harassment training. And a lot of us were like shrugging our shoulders and we're like, why are we getting blamed for something that Bill O'Reilly did? I have children in Catholic school. All the parents have to go through several hours of training for spotting sexual predators. We can't work at all with children at the school volunteering without having this. I think it's a fine program, but this was in response to the priest pedophilia controversy all over the country and in the world. It was but the parents were the ones that were being sort of singled out as to sort of make up for that in terms of making the church put a better face on the church. I know these are disparate examples, but I feel like in reading some of the comments from some of the baristas after this, they were saying, why am I going through this? We have labor issues right now where they don't even know what their hours are 2 weeks ahead, and it's like the lowest guy on the totem pole is taking the fall for one bad manager's decision and a company that wants to sort of like go into damage control mode. And so I'm taking a different kind of approach to this, but I feel like I'm not sure shutting down every shop for several hours of training was probably in their best interest.
Stephenie, what are your thoughts on this scenario?
Well, I actually, I go to Starbucks every day, as do many people, and I talk to the baristas at the store that I go to, and they felt very positive about the training. And obviously this is one store and I go there every day. But I think, listening to them and then reading about it, where this was really a conversation about things that they could talk about that had happened to them, really made them feel part of the process at Starbucks, I think.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. Kurt Vaughn asks, how long do you think Starbucks will keep its policy of letting anyone hang out there without buying anything? Ross, I'll let you take that one.
I guess it's up to Starbucks. I mean, a lot of these CEOs come in and out, and they change every couple of years. It's very possible they'll get a new CEO and change the policy. I don't think that, again, if they're going to restrict, movement into the store, they can do that. That's fine, but that's not who they are. They're a public place. So if people want to come in and sit down, that's fine, in my opinion. If they want to have a situation where you have to buy something at the entrance, that's fine too, but they need to change their brand at that point.
What about yourself, Stephenie? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I know that the CEO has been he's been there for a long time, very outspoken about the store and being a public place that's welcoming for everybody. I mean, my guess is that the policy stays. I will just comment, interestingly, I think the bias issue is very real because, again, I go to a lot of Starbucks and a lot of coffee shops, and people are in there all the time who haven't bought something. So, the question is, this incident happened highlighting that there was obviously a racial bias in terms of that particular manager. So I think it's really about how Starbucks wants to ensure that it's being equitable in the way that it treats everybody who goes into the Starbucks spaces. And so my guess is it's going to stay for a long time, but it could change. It could be that something happens and it changes.
Kelley, how likely is it that another network will pick up Roseanne?
I doubt it. I think that, in this case, and this goes back to your comment about growing up or being brought up in a different era, I think there is a line that you can cross. And if you look at like Mel Gibson, for example, yes, he's still in movies, but he is never going to attain the level of success and appreciation from his peers that he had before he made all those racist, anti-Semitic and homophobic comments. I think in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry, there is a line you can cross. I think she crossed that line. If she comes back, it wouldn't be right away. I can't tell you how the culture may be more accepting, in the future, but I don't think that that's in the cards for her anytime soon.
Stephenie, what do you think? Do you think a station will pick up her show?
I hope not. I agree with you. I hope not. I think we're at a time where people are accountable for their behavior in a different way than we've seen in the past. And my guess is that there won't be certainly a big network that would pick her up. I don't know if there's some kind of smaller network, or she pursues an option like Sirius for her, a TV equivalent. I don't know. I don't think she'll get picked up by a major network.
Ross, do you think that there's room in our society for helping bigots, racists, homophobes figure out a way to join us instead of judging them and tossing them to the side?
I think that's a good question. I think that even somebody who's like a racist or a bigot, I think that there's still common ground between a lot of people, and I think that common ground can be found. I don't have an answer on how to engage in that directly, but I would say it's a lot more prevalent than a lot of people think it is. It just reminds me of some of the quotes I heard even from Joe Biden. So I think it is pretty prevalent across the board in a lot of ways, unfortunately.
Okay, and now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. Who would like to start? Stephenie, I'll throw it at you.
Well, I'll start. I think we have lots of underreported stories, by the way, just because we're obviously beset with all these other crazy things happening all the time. But I'm really concerned that we're not reporting on a story like the famine and civil war in Yemen, which is a country that I have visited many times. In the last couple of months, again, there's been more and more reporting coming out that at least 8 million people in Yemen are starving. 3/4 of the population of Yemen, which is about 20 million people, have been affected greatly by this conflict. There's no food, no aid is getting in easily, and it's a tragic story in a place where if we don't really help that part of the world stabilize, it continues to be a breeding ground for terrorism. So there's a national security reason we should be interested, in addition to a purely humanitarian reason. Of course, this is a horrible thing happening, but I think we need to be paying attention to stories like that around the world, because these are places that really matter to us, again, both as world citizens, but really in terms of looking at our national security interest moving forward.
I agree. Ross, what's your most underreported story for the week?
Most underreported story for the week is I read an article that a teacher in New York, who's 32 years old, was writing about how he's going to get 68% of his salary for all of retirement. He retires at age 55 after 30 years of service. So I calculate he's going to get about $1.1 million if he lives to be about 85. And I believe there's a narrative in the country right now that certain jobs are underpaid. And I think it's important that as taxpayers we take into consideration the total amount being paid out when we're thinking about, as well as the performance that's coming from these employees. And that's the same for the United Nations on an international level as well. And that actually, as far as the Yemen situation goes, that's my first question when you were talking is, where's the UN? Isn't that their job? So just holding people to a higher standard and being cognizant of the amount of money that we're paying out for these things.
Kelley.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of yours. I came here with my underreported story, which is on Yemen as well, but it was that the House of Representatives actually passed a bill requiring the Department of Defense to investigate whether or not that they had been involved, even tangentially, with the torture programs that are going on in Yemen by the UAE, which are all our allies. We have troops on the ground in Yemen. We've been assisting Saudi Arabia in bombing that country and blockading it. The House of Representatives wants to know, have we been involved in the torture and the interrogation practices there? Because there's at least 18 clandestine prisons in there now, and 2,000 Yemenis have disappeared, and they're being held in prisons in which they're literally rolling them around on a spit over flames to torture them. Are we involved? I don't know, but it's a big question.
All right, that's all for this week. I'm Donna Davis. Thanks for watching The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.